Well over a third of North Americans believe we've been visited by creatures from another world. An astonishing number, considering no alien has been photographed, interviewed, or given a press conference. This belief in alien life forms is fueled by the crash of an unidentified flying object in Roswell, New Mexico, over 50 years ago. The crash in the desert town of Roswell is a sacred event for UFO believers, tantamount to the birth of Christ.
Roswell was a turning point in man's history. It clearly established several interesting things. One, we're not alone in the universe.
This is the Holy Grail. This is the smoking gun. This is the case that will prove that UFOs are extraterrestrial.
The United States Air Force claims the Roswell story is just a fairy tale.
Roswell never happened. There never was a spacecraft that landed Roswell. There never was an alien.
Today, as far as the Air Force is concerned, it's not only case closed, it's case solved.
The roots of the Roswell story can be traced back to the late 19th century, the dawn of the modern era of UFO sightings. A time when magnificent men and their flying machines are on a quest to conquer flight. And the people who see UFOs aren't seeing flying saucers, but monstrous airships, man-made.
During 1896, 1897, there was a technology mania sweeping across the United States. And there was a rumor that an American had been the first person to perfect a heavier-than-air flying machine, a practical vessel. In that climate, people started seeing airships everywhere.
There are accounts that describe these airships with wings flapping like a giant bird. Each report that is printed in the newspapers fuels what becomes a national obsession. The public believes these airships are secret military weapons.
For the most part, which is very funny, the airships were populated with human beings, most of them on their way to bomb the Spanish in Cuba.
And like Roswell 50 years later, there is talk of the government deliberately hiding the truth from the public.
There were stories, rumors, that the United States government was actually responsible for the airship sightings and was conducting secret experiments.
In the small town of Aurora, Texas, there is an account that has a remarkable parallel with Roswell 50 years later. There are reports that the remains of a crashed airship have been uncovered, as well as the body of the pilot, an alien being. The report is published in the Wise County Messenger and is picked up by other newspapers. People drive for hundreds of miles to the local cemetery to see the alien remains. But soon, doubts are cast on the entire story.
It apparently was started by a stringer for the Dallas Morning News who was from Aurora. Aurora had been bypassed by the railroad, and disease had pretty well decimated the population, and he was trying to put his small town back on the map.
Within a week, the story dies down and is forgotten.
Came the father of aviation.
In the next several years, the Wright brothers invent the airplane, and the fantasy of heavier-than-air flight craft becomes reality. The mystery is all explained, UFO sightings die off, until World War II.
Memory of the first airplane.
The air battles during the Second World War give people across the globe a new reason to fear the skies. There is a sudden resurgence of UFO sightings.
And it really was a byproduct of World War II. That was really the first time in U.S. history or in world history that people really watched the skies. They were looking for enemy bombers. During World War II, the Japanese launched balloon bombs that actually landed in the northwestern United States, and 4 people were killed.
There were lots of reports by pilots of strange vehicles, each side thinking they were the other's secret weapons, so of course it didn't talk a lot about it. It's only after the war when the pilots got together, I thought they were yours. Oh, we thought they were yours.
The public is terrified of new weapons of mass destruction that can be launched from the ground and flown through the air without a plane or a pilot.
Everyone had German V rockets on their minds, and there was a war hysteria at the time. People were very concerned about foreign weapons and the atomic bomb, and the atomic bomb would be deployed most likely in the form of a rocket.
This morbid fascination with the skies soon turns into a frenzy. On June 24th, 1947, a remarkable sighting. Amateur pilot Kenneth Arnold is flying his single-engine plane when he sees strange crescent-shaped objects in the sky. This sighting is the spark that will lead to the country's excitement over Roswell, for it is the first time an airborne pilot sees UFOs.
He wasn't thinking space travelers. He was thinking secret government vehicle. Wow, so fast. Look at that. And 9 of them.
He timed the sighting, the objects moving between a couple of points on the ground, and determined they were moving around 1,800 miles an hour. In 1947, we hadn't even broken the sound barrier yet, which is, 760 miles an hour at sea level. Here's something moving about 3 times that speed, or 2 times that speed plus.
After the atom bomb was developed in secrecy, you see, everybody knew the government did some things that they didn't tell us about.
Arnold first calls authorities about the UFOs, but gets no response. To the Air Force, the Kenneth Arnold sighting is a common occurrence.
I think it'd be safe to believe that Kenneth Arnold saw things that pilots see today and have seen for years. When you're flying, it's very difficult to judge the time, speed, and distance. That's why you have aircraft instruments inside your aircraft.
Dismissed by the authorities, Arnold tells several newspapers about the strange objects. They grab the story and run with it. Newspapers across the states print the headline, "Flying Saucers," and a new phrase is coined.
Prior to 1947, there were only a handful of reports in which people had said that they had seen flying saucers, and actually used the term saucer.
And it just kind of hit the public at the right time with the right kind of mystery, and it moved something in the human psyche, and that was why the Kenneth Arnold sighting, I think, became such a big one. And then people began looking for UFO sightings, began going out and looking for UFOs.
And triggered by that press report, there were several hundred, if not thousands, of flying saucer reports all over the United States and around the world.
The very next day, 9 objects are seen over Kansas City. A week later, 2 oval-shaped flying objects are seen in Pueblo, Colorado. In Oklahoma, 2 illuminated discs. There are hundreds of sightings across North America. When a strange vehicle crashes in Roswell, New Mexico just 2 weeks later, the world is ready to believe flying saucers are real.
And now back to Turning Points of History on History Television.
In southeastern New Mexico, rain falls for only a handful of days in the year, and visibility stretches for hundreds of miles. There lies the sleepy town of Roswell. There's barely a blip on the map. Roswell looks like it jumped out of a Norman Rockwell painting of Main Street, USA. Stuck in the middle of the New Mexican desert, it is also the home of great Western legends. Sheriff Pat Garrett built a home here after he gunned down Billy the Kid. Roswell is cowboy country.
It was the land of manana. We didn't do anything today if we could do it tomorrow.
But even this small ranching town gets infected with UFO fever. Alerted by Kenneth Arnold's sighting, the folks of Roswell start witnessing strange happenings in the skies above them.
Well, they looked just like flying saucers. And they had lights all over them. There was quite a few of them that used to fly across that area up there.
Residents suspect this night activity is a high-security military experiment. They don't seek explanations, for on the outskirts of Roswell is the home of the elite bomb group, the 509. Its most revered members flew the Enola Gay that dropped the first atom bomb on Hiroshima.
It was a very top-secret base, very sensitive base, and there was a lot of security on the flight line and around there because of the nature of the aircraft that were assigned there and the mission that they had there.
Near Roswell is the White Sands Proving Ground where captured German V-2 rockets are launched and advanced radar is tested. Also close by is Los Alamos, where the first atom bombs were detonated. Some believe that if observers from a different planet wish to assess our destructive potential, this was the place to watch.
It was perfectly clear that Earthlings would soon be able to bother beings out there. And I don't think it's any coincidence at all that the only place on the whole planet in July 1947 where you could check all three of those technologies was southeastern New Mexico.
On the July 4th long weekend, a thunderous sound shatters the sky. The next day, rancher Mac Brazel is concerned that an aircraft might have crashed on his property. He heads out into his fields looking for wreckage. He is perplexed because all he finds are small pieces of strange metal scattered over hundreds of yards.
You guess some aircraft, airplane or something had crashed there. And I asked him if there was any people on it, and he said no. No sign of any people. So I believed him. He never did lie to me.
And there was nothing conventional, no engines, no propellers, no radios, no rivets. And what bothered him the most is that the sheep wouldn't cross the debris field.
Brazel talks to his neighbors about his discovery. He decides that since he has to go to town to trade a load of wool for a truck, he might as well tell the authorities. On his way, he meets up with a policeman.
So the state policeman told him, says, well, you go in and report it to the sheriff. You can get hold to the Air Force and they'll take care of it. And that's the way it all got started. If he'd just went on and sold his wool and bought a pickup and went home, why, all this wouldn't be going on.
To Sheriff Wilcox, this is a serious matter. It could be the remains of a secret Army weapon.
The sheriff calls the base. The duty officer just happened to be Major Jesse Marcel, a base intelligence officer. This is Sunday. The sheriff tells him there's this cowboy in there with some strange wreckage. He thinks he ought to check it out. Maybe it's one of yours, I don't know.
Major Marcel checks with Colonel Blanchard, the base commander of the 509, who tells him to go investigate the crash site. When Marcel gets there, he too is perplexed by what he finds.
There was a foil-like material that you could fold it, and fold it again, and fold it again, and it would unfold on its own, which is weird. And you couldn't scratch it. Very strong, but extraordinarily lightweight.
Jesse Marcel is convinced that the debris was not manufactured on this planet. Considering the flying saucer news stories, he thinks this is an unprecedented moment in human history. Here is proof that a ship from another planet tried to visit us. He's so thrilled he wakes up his son.
So I put my bathrobe on, followed him into the kitchen, and on the kitchen floor there was a lot of metal parts and debris, and I sort of did not know what it was. And he said words to the effect that this is parts of a flying saucer. And at that time I wasn't even quite sure what a flying saucer was. I thought, well, this is something unusual. And he did say that this is probably something we'll never see again. That's the reason he drove out of the way to the house to show it to us.
What 11-year-old Jesse Marcel sees that night is breathtaking.
I guess the most important thing that I recall from that time was a little beam that I picked up, and I remember there was some, looked like writing on the inner surface of it. You know, the kitchen light was over my left shoulder, so I held it up like this to look at this writing. There's a kind of a purple geometric symbols and figures written along the inside of this beam that I recall looking like an I-beam. You know, after we looked at this material for about 15 or 20 minutes, we put it back in some of the cardboard boxes that it was initially put in, and I helped my dad bring it back out to the car, and he drove off to the base, and I went back to bed.
Major Marcel drives to the base with this very sensitive cargo. When he returns much later, he is fidgety and nervous.
When he did come back, he sat my mother and myself down and saying, this is something that we're never to talk about again, that it didn't happen. It's a non-event, so don't ever talk to us about your friends or even amongst the family as far as that goes.
The debris is stored in Hangar 84. It is guarded as closely as a captured enemy aircraft. Colonel Blanchard believes he is on the verge of making history. Aliens have landed, and he is the only one that has proof. He orders his public information officer, Walter Haught, to issue a press release.
My first reaction was, oh no, not us. There had been many, many, many reports of flying objects in the news media, both newspaper and radio, at oh gosh, we're sticking our neck into something we ought not to, because I did not get to see it. I had no idea what I was writing about other than what I was told to do.
News reporter Frank Joyce then reads the release on the local radio station, KGFL.
The boss, W.E. Whitmore, calls down, Frank, what the hell is going on down there? And I say, Mr. Whitmore, I got this release from the air base. Mr. Whitmore comes in and says, Joyce, where is that release you say you have? You got a release? Let's see it. So anyway, I started looking for this release. I finally found it, pulled it out, handed it to him, and he gets this release, and I can still see him. He looks at this release, and then he looks up at me. And then he walked out, didn't say, and I thought, boy, I'm really in it now, you know. I'm in the middle of something here that's pretty big, and I mean, it's really big.
The story acquires a life of its own. No sooner does it hit the wire service than the news of a crashed flying saucer is broadcast across the country.
Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week.
Reporters all across the world hustle to get to the bottom of this front-page scoop.
To obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago.
It was like panic. We had one phone line into our office, and the phone rang continually. I went home for lunch, and the phone rang at my home continually. Finally, I told my wife to take the phone off of the cradle and forget it. Got back to the base, and it was still going on out at the base.
At the base, Major Marcel is given strict orders. Load the debris onto a B-29 and take it to the high-security Wright-Patterson Air Base near Dayton, Ohio. This is where enemy weapons are inspected by the top investigators in the country. Marcel makes one stop at the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas, where Commander General Roger Ramey takes charge. Ramey wants the wreckage examined by his own man, Warrant Officer Irving Newton, a meteorologist. But Newton is manning the weather station.
And I get a notice, a call, telephone call. And they said the general would like you to come over to his office and identify something. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I can't leave here. I'm the only forecaster here, and there'll be airplanes coming in, there'll be airplanes calling in into flight service. I just can't leave. Okay, everything done. About 5 minutes later, the telephone rings again. This is General Ramey. He said, get your ass over to my office. He said, if you got a car, drive it. If you haven't, take the first car with a key in it and get over here. Aye, aye, sir.
Newton examines the debris while an anxious press wait outside, wondering whether the story of the century will be confirmed.
So I went into the general's office, and here's all this crap on the floor, like in all those pictures. And I says, is that your flying saucer? And they said, well, yes, it is. And I said, well, that's a bunch of horse pucky. I said, that's a Raywin sound, target and a balloon in there. And if it isn't, I said, I would eat it without salt or pepper. I know what that is.
Ramey calls the press in. The verdict has changed. The debris is from a common weather balloon. And as for that I-beam with all those strange markings, it was from a radar reflector.
We discovered that the radar reflectors were manufactured during World War II, during a time of great shortage in the United States. And this particular contract was given to a toy company. These were they were made of balsa wood and tinfoil. And part of the tape that they used to reinforce the seam was actually tape that they used in manufacture of toys. And so it did have colorful symbols on it. And when people found these objects in New Mexico, they were definitely surprised to find them and wouldn't know what they were.
The story is dead. Back at the 509, the dream of making history is deflated.
General Ramey came out with a statement to the effect that we were wrong. That was a weather balloon. Period, end. When the general said it was a weather balloon, it was a weather balloon.
There are no more investigations. No one questions the second press release. The town of Roswell, which had risen briefly out of obscurity, once again descends into a sleepy torpor.
Nobody even thought anything about it. There's so much going on out that base and all the country back in those days, atomic bomb. Hell, it could have been anything. Nobody was that curious about it because it wasn't a need to know.
The story of an alien crash landing may have died, but it refused to be buried. 40 years later, the story is resurrected, and this time they find more than just metallic debris.
And now back to Turning Points of History on History Television.
In the next 40 years, countless stories of alien visitations make the headlines. People see them, talk to them, and are even abducted by them. But the crash at Roswell continues to overshadow every other event in the UFO world.
What we found were very credible people, witnesses whose backgrounds do check out, telling us this story is real.
And the story they are telling is that there was a cover-up. New details are revealed as officers from the airfield at Roswell start contradicting the Army's official story. Jesse Marcel Sr., after years of silence, finally tells his son that the press photos at Fort Worth were staged.
You know, the material that we saw on our kitchen floor was not like the debris at the office of General Ramey in Fort Worth. Because looking at those photographs, you know, what I saw there was obviously what looked like a balloon with a metal radar target there. I'd seen targets before. My dad had worked with them.
Oh, he knew there was a cover-up. He was told not to say anything. He knows it wasn't a radar reflector from a weather balloon. He knows that what was shown in the general's office wasn't what he brought in and wasn't what the rancher picked up. He saw the stuff out there. His son saw the stuff. His son has looked at the picture and saying, that's not what we had on the kitchen floor.
My dad said that the material was substituted. The real material was brought out of the office, General Ramey's office. So my dad had no knowledge of what happened after that, after the debris, the real debris.
The Air Force denies they substituted balloon debris for flying saucer debris.
This is not consistent with the facts. We obtained the original photographs and examined them in detail, had them closely scrutinized. The objects that were photographed were indeed elements of radar reflectors and weather balloons, and there's no evidence to support any of the allegations that these objects were switched at any time.
Witnesses like Bill Brazel say the reason the story lay dormant for so long was because the Air Force intimidated them into silence.
The Air Force got a hold of it, and right away they just captured Dad. They put him in a safe house, they called it. He was under surveillance all the time, and they kept him for 2 or 3 days. He was pretty mad about it.
Bill Brazel tried to find out from his father what really happened.
Yeah, I asked him lots of questions. He'd say, "Oh, you don't need to know." And that was it. I didn't ask him the same questions over and over and over again. He'd have knocked me off my horse.
With more people convinced of a cover-up, the U.S. Congress in 1994 directs the Air Force to write a report about the Roswell incident. The Air Force makes a startling and frank admission. The weather balloon story was a smokescreen, deliberately misleading the public and the press. What really crashed in Roswell in 1947 was part of a classified military experiment called Project Mogul. Project Mogul devices used regular weather balloons, but they weren't for gauging the weather. They were used to spy on the enemy.
To detect the first atomic explosion to be detonated by the Russians. This was a very sensitive project because we didn't want the Russians to know that we knew they were going to detonate a weapon, and nor do we want the American public to know that there was a possibility of this.
The Air Force was testing what really was the very beginnings of our satellite program, and it was held at the top secret level in priority 1A. It was not to be disclosed to anyone who's not properly cleared.
There'll always be a sensitive projects like this that affect national security that you don't tell the public to, and that's the fact of life.
As for those who claim the Air Force told them to keep quiet, the Air Force says it's possible, even likely.
Individuals who recovered components of the Project Mogul balloon train, if they indeed were contacted by the Air Force, there's no evidence to support that they were. If they were contacted, it would not be unusual for them to be instructed not to discuss the objects they found.
But witnesses say they were silenced about something far more explosive than secret balloons.
And now back to Turning Points of History on History Television.
The Air Force report fails to satisfy those who believe a flying saucer crashed in Roswell. Researchers discover new witnesses, and the Roswell story gets even more fantastic. New witnesses claim that a second UFO crashed in July 1947, just a few miles away from the Brazel site. Here, they find something startling.
Out there, we have an almost intact saucer stuck in the ground with the gash in one side, like this, like two parentheses face to face, the gash, which is why I say probably a mid-air collision. Think of two saucers.
It's not just debris this time. They find bodies, alien bodies.
There were 4 bodies next to it. 2 were dead, 1 was dying, the 3rd seemed to be alive, at least was responding to the people who were there, out in the middle of nowhere.
Alien bodies breathe new life into the Roswell story.
I've talked to probably around a dozen people who claim to have seen the bodies.
Apparently the bodies were found a couple miles away.
What we find is they're short individuals, 4.5, maybe 5 feet tall, very thin, more of the body of a slender 10-year-old boy.
Humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head and the body. 4 slender, long fingers, no thumb.
The head slightly larger than the head on a human body. The eye slightly larger than the eyes in a human.
Practically no nose, little slits. No mouth, little slit. Holes for ears. No hair.
With alien bodies and witnesses that saw them, it begs the question, what did the Air Force do with the bodies?
I had tried to find out who would handle bodies. You know, was there a base mortuary? No, there wasn't, but there was a man in town, a funeral home in town that handled stuff for the base. His name was Glenn Dennis.
Glenn Dennis was the town mortician working at the Ballard Funeral Home in 1947. He handled all burial services for military personnel. He remembers receiving a strange phone call from an officer at the airbase at the time of the crash.
The mortuary officer called and I talked to him. He wanted to know if we had 3.5, 4 foot, 3.5 feet or 4 foot hermetically sealed baby caskets. How many did we have?
There were no more phone calls for baby caskets, but the story gets even stranger. When the next call comes from the airfield, it's a request to have an injured airman driven back to the base. Dennis was also the town ambulance man. He drives private parks to the base hospital.
And that's when this nurse that I knew real well came out of a supply room. She had a towel over her face, and she saw me and she screamed and said, "Glenn, get out of here as fast as you can. You're going to get in trouble."
Dennis claims a belligerent red-haired captain then threatened him.
Parks goes inside, and that's when he gets threatened by a nasty red-headed officer who tells him, "You don't say anything." He doesn't know anything. It's only after he talked to the nurse that he found out about the bodies.
My nurse drew me a diagram back in then when I met her out at the base that day on the back of a prescription pad. She drew me what she thinks she saw.
She told them that she had to participate in a dissection or an autopsy of these strange bodies that stunk to high heaven. 4 fingers, again, a completely independent witness now.
Glenn Dennis is not the only witness saying there were bodies. Dozens of people have come forward. Frankie Rose says she was sworn to secrecy, but 40 years later, she broke her silence.
My dad was Dan Dwyer, and he was a fireman at the Roswell Fire Department. They received a call that they thought was a plane crash. And they arrived at the location where he said a flying saucer had crashed. And there was one of the little people that was still alive, and there were 2 that were dead.
Naturally, they were collected, put into lead-lined body bags, which, given the 509th Bomb Group being an atomic bomb group, would have had access to those, transported to the Roswell Army Airfield, kept in Hangar 84 for a short period of time, and then were loaded on 2 separate aircraft in case one of them crashes, and flown out of Roswell and on to Wright-Patterson, Wright Base at the time, Wright at Patterson Air Force Base, for subsequent study.
The Air Force dismisses all accounts of alien bodies as uncorroborated speculation.
What we know today as the Roswell incident is really very similar to a fish story. What started as a fish this big has now grown over the years to this big, bigger, and bigger.
Alien bodies secretly housed on U.S. Air Force bases. This is the conspiracy theory that fuels an Unsolved Mysteries episode on Roswell. Hundreds of callers respond. When an underground video is broadcast of a supposed autopsy on an alien, the U.S. Air Force decides it is time to put an end to this. The Air Force issues a second report on Roswell in 1997. This time it focuses on the sightings of alien bodies. It says that people who claim they saw aliens actually saw crash test dummies.
What we were able to reconstruct is that individuals did see Air Force testing taking place in the New Mexico desert near Roswell. And there were indeed odd objects being dropped, some that looked like spacecraft. There were anthropomorphic crash test dummies that do fit the classic description of an alien.
They had a pressure suit on, they had a space helmet on, some of them had their noses removed, some of them had been beat up as a result of these tests. And we dropped these dummies. and they landed out in the foothills near Roswell. And on a couple of occasions, we went out there to recover these dummies. We would pick them up on a gurney, a stretcher, because it's an easy way to carry a couple of 100-pound dummy. We would load on the stretcher, we would tote it out of the desert and throw it in the back of our truck and drive away. If someone saw that, they would say, my goodness, they're transporting somebody.
The Air Force also offers another explanation to the people who claim they saw aliens. Not crash test dummies, but real live airmen. Joseph Kittinger was a captain at White Sands who was dropped from 100,000 feet. He was one of 3 airmen who crashed in a balloon experiment.
We had a very high wind, and when we landed, the gondola flipped, and it landed on top of us. And one guy got the scalp all squished, and all the blood vessels ruptured beneath his scalp. And now we walked into the hospital. Here's one person with a big head, alien-looking head, with just the nose sticking out. And I didn't particularly want to say what we were doing and why we were doing it. It wasn't classified, but I just wanted to get out of there as quick as I could.
Kittinger believes he was the captain who had an encounter with mortician Glenn Dennis that night at the airbase.
And they claimed there was a red-haired captain that was a cover-up. There was a red-haired captain that was abusive, that told them that they were in danger if they said anything about it. And the Roswell report indicates that I was probably that red-haired captain that people referred to.
These accounts are all written in the second Roswell report, which holds that the Roswell incident is a collection of folk tales, second-generation accounts, and confused memories.
Our experiments we did back in the 50s, and my balloon accident where we went into Roswell Airport, I think all of those kind of got mixed up into the same soup, and they ended up where they had more pizzazz to the story. They had a cover-up, they had aliens, they had a red-haired captain, they had people being brought into the hospital, all banged up.
But Roswell witnesses denied that they could confuse experiments that took place in the 1950s with a crash that happened in 1947. Kevin Randall remains suspicious of the Air Force's arguments.
Why would the Air Force care what a bunch of UFO nuts believes about the Roswell case if there's nothing to it? Why spend taxpayer time, money, and effort to produce a final report in 1994 to say, oh, it was a Project Mogul balloon? And they said, that's our final report. Then in 1997, they come up with their second final report to explain the bodies. If there's nothing to this, why does the Air Force care what we believe? Why are they working so hard to convince us nothing happened here, if nothing happened here?
There's no way there could be a cover-up. When you think there'd be hundreds of people involved in such a thing like the Roswell incident, the security police, the truck drivers, the medics, the doctors, the nurses, the PR people, the administrative people, there'd be hundreds of people associated with such an event. And there's no way that you could ever cover it up. Even if you wanted to, you could never cover it up.
But Randall says that because people are skeptical of UFO stories, it would be easy to keep this covered up.
Yes, this is a big secret. It's a secret that has been well kept, but it's also a self-keeping secret because it's such an incredible secret. You mean to tell me there are extraterrestrial visitors? You mean to tell me that we have actual evidence of that going on? This is an amazing secret, and I think the ramifications of that secret is one of the reasons it's been kept for so long.
But if it's a secret, it's the worst kept secret in the world. Today, everyone knows about Roswell. It has become pop culture mania.
And now back to Turning Points of History on History Television.
The UFO community remains undeterred by the Air Force reports. They are on a mission to persuade the public that Roswell is the most significant event in the history of the human race.
I think they've run this horse so long that there's no more breath left in the horse. I think that the story's been told so many times in so many different directions, looking at it from so many different angles, I don't think there's anything left that they can reinvent on Roswell.
Well, that was explanation number 3. But they said nothing about bodies. Well, that won't do, so they came up with explanation number 4. I've certainly looked at more than...
Of course, Kittinger can never hope to keep Stanton Friedman from spreading the word. Here he is delivering a lecture before executives of Chrysler near Detroit for $3,000. After his speech, Friedman sets up his table of wares, books, videotapes, as well as Xeroxed articles for which he charges up to $10. The Air Force sees this as brash exploitation.
Here in Washington, we have an old saying. It's called follow the money. And if you follow the money in the Roswell incident, you'll find the source of many of these allegations.
Yes, this is my favorite CIA-released UFO.
But that's not stopping the UFO writers from pursuing their research.
Much more, if that's the best somebody can do, they attack Roswell. Time magazine complains about Roswell making money from celebrating the 50th anniversary. What does Time do? Puts the word Roswell on the cover. It was their best-selling issue all year until Princess Di died. That's the pot calling the kettle black. Why did they put it on the cover? Because they wanted to sell magazines.
Irving Newton is bemused by all the fuss.
They say, don't you get tired of talking about this? Hell no, I get a big kick out of this. And I'm not going to lie. I says, I'm the only guy that hasn't written a book. They said, well, why don't you write a book? I said, that's what I should do. Hire some outfit, make a real fancy cover, about this thick, nice cover on the back with a good binding on it. You open it up and the first page, horse pucky. The whole damn book. I could sell those like crazy.
The town of Roswell is not shy about its newfound fame. It's become a UFO theme park with restaurants, souvenir shops, and even UFO museums. The biggest UFO museum in Roswell is owned by the former town mortician, Glenn Dennis.
We had our 500,000 mark the other day, last Thursday. 500,000 people been through this museum. There's no telling them anymore. 61% of the people come to Roswell come to see this dumb museum.
But ultimately, it's not the souvenir shops that keep people coming back to Roswell. There is a deeper appeal to the Roswell story that has captivated millions. In an age where science has explained away spirits, ghosts, and even religion, UFOs are the one phenomena that suggest we are not alone in the universe.
UFOs are a substitute for God in a secular age. What is it that Wilford Brimley said in the movie Cocoon? We won't get sick, we won't get any older, and we'll never die. And that's the message.
Look at all the kids are taught that there is an Easter Bunny, there is a Santa Claus, and there is a Tooth Fairy. Now, you believe all that crap. Now, sooner or later, you're going to grow up out of that. So what have I got left? I need some mystery in my life. So why don't we have aliens? Okay.
Scientists today are still seeking signs of other life forms in our universe. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, is carried out at universities and research institutes across the world. Day and night, these radio telescopes are aimed at the sky, listening.
The notion that they're stuck at the level of radio is absurd. It assumes there is no colonization, there is no migration. They won't spend 2 minutes looking at the evidence that aliens are coming here. Now, either they want to look for extraterrestrial intelligence or they don't.
There's science associated with looking for other life forms and other worlds and other universes. And then on the other side, there's people who said that they've already arrived and Roswell was one of the incidents. That they're diametrically opposed.
But whether or not the UFO crash at Roswell is fact, it seems people will believe in the fiction of Roswell for a long time.
The UFO mystery will not be solved by looking to the skies and searching for evidence of aliens or otherworldly beings, but by looking to the earth and at the human mind and at what deep-seated psychological needs are being fulfilled. Science says that God and religion are false. Yet aliens could exist. And if they have the technology for interstellar space travel and to visit Earth, and if they transfer that technology, they could elevate us to the immortal realm of the gods.